Thank you for your patience with me as I was challenged with the timing. So I'm going to present for Jim Van Overschelde and myself. We have a research center in Texas in the United States, and we looked at outcomes of students with teachers teaching out of field. We looked at secondary math and English language arts. Let's see. All right, so I'm not sure if you all already went over this or not, but thinking about how we are operationalizing the term, thinking about when teachers teach classes for which they are not licensed, they're considered teaching out of field. And that teaching out of field is not due to a lack of a degree or initial teacher education. Some people may call it certification or licensure, but instead it's a mismatch between where the teacher has been trained, what field they've been trained in, and what their teaching assignment may be for a particular class. It might not even be for the entire day. It might be for one class period, and we can look at that in our work. We know from the literature that students show less academic growth when they are taught out of field. We also know that this is an equity issue, that the likelihood of being taught out of field in the United States is higher for students of color, for our students who are learning English, and we call them emergent bilinguals currently in our state, multilingual students. We also know that the likelihood of being taught out of field is higher for students in rural areas. In the United States, policies have impacted teachers teaching out of field, and the rates of teaching out of field have increased dramatically since federal changes to policies in 2015. Prior to Every Student Succeeds Act, federal policy mandates in 2015, we had much stricter policies around teacher licensure and teaching out of field, teacher qualifications. So the study I'm presenting on is, we look at students between the fall of 2011 and the spring of 2018. And we can see that more than 2 million classes in both English and math were taught by a teacher teaching out of field in grades 7 through 12 in Texas. This is what we call secondary school in Texas, starting in 6th grade. We typically call that secondary all the way to 12th grade. And these subject areas are the highest number of courses where we have teachers teaching out of field in the state of Texas. So we found that interesting and we wanted to dig deeper. Much of the literature focuses on STEM areas. And while that's also very important and math is a part of STEM, we also wanted to include English. Most people don't think of English as an area where teachers are teaching out of field. But as you can see from this slide, actually English has the most classes taught out of field of any classes in the state of Texas. And this comes from some work Jim he conducted with a colleague, and they looked at secondary classes across all different subject matters, and English and math were the highest number of classes, not necessarily percentage, but the highest number. So we asked these research questions in this study. Does teaching out of field impact student achievement and growth in English and math in secondary schools? So essentially we're asking, does having a teacher teaching out of field hurt students in their growth and achievement? We also asked, we're looking at teacher preparation. Our research center focuses mostly on teacher preparation. So we wanted to find out, does teacher preparation subject matter? Does type of preparation matter? And so we looked into that. And once we started with research question 1 and we saw the negative impact, we wanted to find out how many years would it take for a teacher teaching out of field to overcome the negative impact on student learning. So I will talk about those 3 things. Again, our context is in the state of Texas in the United States. It is the state with the 2nd largest public student enrollment in the US. It's very diverse demographically, and we have an incredible state longitudinal data system that we're able to access and use with millions and even billions of records that we use and look into and analyze. And another thing about our context that is fairly unique is that teaching out of field is clearly defined in Texas in our rules, in our education code. And so all of these things make it a great context for studying teaching out of field. So what we did is we conducted a 3-level hierarchical linear modeling, and we looked at student learning in English and math as measured by the scores on end of course exams, which are required in the state of Texas for each of the grade levels that we are looking at, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th in English language arts. And in math, we look at 7th, 8th, and Algebra 1, which could potentially be your 8th grade year, depending on when you take Algebra 1. English is a subject that is required for all students in every grade. Math is required for all the students in the grades that we looked at, but because some students can choose to take algebra earlier than others, it's not always correlated as neatly with each grade as it would be in English language arts. Another thing about this context is we do have a state mandated curriculum in the courses, and that curriculum is aligned with the end of course exams that are required and is aligned with the teacher preparation if a teacher is prepared in Texas. So all of these things are aligned and allow us to look at achievement and preparation in this way. So the state longitudinal data system that we used for our research is over 30 years of student and teacher data, over 5.4 million students annually, 400,000 teachers annually. It's huge, right? This is basically saying this is a huge data set that we're able to utilize for this research and have very powerful statistical models. We looked at student enrollment, what kinds of services they received, student teacher course data, all kinds of assessments that they took. And again, the curriculum is linked to teacher preparation programs and licensure. This is a reminder of our research questions. So we were looking at, does teaching out of field impact student achievement growth in English and math? And does teacher preparation matter? And then how long does it take for a teacher teaching out of field to overcome the negative deficit? We used 3-level hierarchical linear modeling. Number 1 is the student level, number 2 is the teacher level, number 3 is the school level. I'm going to talk on another slide about the licensure of each teacher's. And in this model, we accounted for how many years the teachers had been teaching, how many years the teachers had been teaching that particular course. We also accounted for what are the different student demographics. We looked at prior performance on the state assessment, and were able to calculate what sort of average kind of growth would be for the student. And that's part of how we figured out where the students should be in the following year. And we also accounted for school locales. Are these urban schools, rural schools? What kind of student body is it? Is it a very diverse student body? Is it kind of on the average of students of color versus white students, socioeconomic status, all these different levels? So this is a slide that we should pay attention to. Oh, I can get rid of, there we go, that's better. I was moving our faces around and then I decided I could minimize them. All right, so teacher licensure groups. This is really important and this will help you understand some of our results. So we have essentially 4 categories of teachers. The first one is fully prepared and licensed teacher in that particular subject of the course they are teaching. So that is the baseline. You're not going to see that category of teachers on the results slides because that's the baseline that we're comparing other teacher groups to. All right. So this first one is a fully prepared and licensed teacher in the subject that they are teaching. Fully trained, fully licensed. All right. So their training, their licensure, and what they're teaching all match up. Then we have the test licensed group of teachers. And these are teachers who have gone through a teacher preparation program and are licensed in another subject. And then what they did is they prepared for and passed a licensure test in the subject they are currently teaching. So for example, they may have been licensed in history, then they prepared for and passed a licensure test in English. And so they are considered test licensed. So in the state of Texas, that's a possibility. You as a teacher, if you are fully prepared and licensed in one thing, you can decide that you want to become licensed in another thing, or maybe your principal has asked you to do this, and then you take a test and you become licensed. So these teachers did not get their license through a teacher preparation program, but they did some kind of work to prepare for and pass the test so that they would be licensed in the subjects they are teaching. All right. The third category, intern licensed. We have alternative certification programs in Texas. And what happens is people decide they want to be teachers. They're not licensed in anything. And as part of their initial teacher training, they become the teacher of record immediately, and they are learning on the job, essentially. So this is typically year 1 or year 2. They are getting their licensure as the same time that they are teaching that subject. All right, that's the intern license. And then the last one is out of field, and that is a teacher who has maybe other licensure, right? They are still licensed in a particular subject, but that is mismatched from what they're teaching. So all of the teachers in our sample are licensed, but they fall into one of these 4 categories for the particular class that they are teaching that we're looking at, which is English Language Arts and Math.
Minda, you've got 2 minutes left.
Oh no, this always happens to me. All right, so let's get to the results. Out of field teachers have a significant deficit with their students. So our teachers who are most effective are the teachers who are in that first category. And here are the results of our English teachers. So the out of field licensed teachers in grade 10, it would take them 29 years to reach the same effectiveness as a year 1 licensed teacher in English. And you can see grade 9 is 12, grade 8 is 10, and grade 7 is 9.7. And then we also looked at test license, and we also looked at intern license. So you can see that our out of field teachers are the least effective when it comes to student growth. Our test license teachers tend to be the second most effective, not always, as you can see in the grade 10. In math, we see a similar pattern where out of field teachers are essentially around 20 years behind in how they are able to be effective with students as compared to fully licensed teachers in grade 8 and 9 and grade 8, and about 12 years in grade 7. And then we have a variety here. The test license do better in grades 8 and 9, not that great in grade 8, and you can see the pattern here. So let's get straight to the implications. Teachers who are assigned to teach out of field have a negative impact on student growth in English and math in secondary grades in the state of Texas as measured by end of course exams. And this exacerbates inequalities. As we know, emerging bilingual students of color and students in rural areas are more likely to have teachers teaching out of field. So subject-specific teacher preparation is most effective. We also see that there's something about taking a test. So this third bullet here, teachers preparing for and passing licensure tests, that will greatly reduce the deficit of our teachers teaching out of field. So this is a policy implication. And finally, this study contributes because preparation, curriculum, and assessment are all aligned in contrast to some other studies. We have a very large data set, and we can conduct significant analyses. We also added English language arts to the conversation. We know there are limitations. We know there are outliers. There are going to be some teachers teaching out of field that are successful. We also are measuring student success with one assessment. We know that's a limitation. And we also can describe this phenomenon, but we can't explain why. So we seek qualitative follow-up. So we know we have a teacher shortage, that the context is very complex. Teaching out of field is most likely not going away in the United States and in Texas. So we want to look into how to train teachers effectively who are teaching out of field. We believe that professional learning needs to be differentiated, and we're starting to dig into some of that research qualitatively. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and